You ever come home from a 12-hour shift, ready to admire your brand new driveway, only to find it in pieces? That was me, Frederick Adams, on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in front of my house, staring at torn-up concrete like it was some kind of bad dream. Only it wasn't a dream. It was the HOA. More specifically, it was Tamara Alcott, the HOA president and full-time pain in everyone's backside. She stood there in her sun hat and oversized sunglasses like she was surveying the ruins of a battlefield she was proud of. And in a way, she was. "Oh, Frederick," she said with that high-pitched, nasal tone she always used when she was about to do something awful. "You knew better than to pave your driveway without submitting the proper forms. We had no choice." "No choice," I said, blinking at the mess. "I submitted that form 6 weeks ago. You even signed off on it in the meeting. I've got the minutes." Tamara clucked her tongue and waved a clipboard like it was a magic wand. "That wasn't final. The committee hadn't reached consensus." "There is no committee," I snapped. "It's just you and your little band of minions who pretend to be busy so you can swing your weight around." She gave a fake laugh and turned to the two guys in neon vests standing by the busted-up driveway. "Boys, make sure the debris is hauled out before 5. We don't want to violate our own landscaping guidelines." I felt my blood pressure rising. This wasn't just some HOA overreach. This was personal. Ever since I outvoted her proposal to ban street parking last spring, she'd had it out for me. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder. Scanned copies of the application, her signature, the HOA guidelines, and a time-stamped video from my Ring camera showing Tamara herself walking up to my door and handing back the approved paperwork. "You tore up my driveway over a lie, Tamara," she blinked but didn't flinch. "That driveway didn't meet aesthetic guidelines. It was too dark. It's charcoal gray. It matches my roof." "Well, it disrupted the harmony of the street," she said, clearly scrambling. That's when my neighbor Marcus walked over. "Frederick, I saw the whole thing. They brought in a crew this morning while you were out. No notice, no warning, just tore it up." Tamara laughed again, but this time it was tighter. "We followed protocol." "No," I said, stepping closer. "You broke into private property and destroyed something you had no right to touch. That's vandalism." Her smile vanished. "Hope you've got good insurance," I added. She turned on her heel and stormed off down the sidewalk, muttering something about legal gray areas. But I wasn't done, not even close. By the time the sun dipped behind the oak trees lining our street, I'd already filed a police report, contacted a construction attorney, and emailed the city's code enforcement division. Tamara might have thought she could bulldoze her way over me, but I wasn't about to let her walk off after authorizing what amounted to destruction of private property. I had hard proof, timestamps, and a neighbor ready to speak on record. I was sitting on my porch with a cold compress against my temple stress headache creeping in when Officer Delaney pulled up. She was tall, with a clipboard tucked under one arm and a no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd handled more than her share of neighborhood power trippers. "You Frederick Adams?" "Yeah," I said, standing. "That's me." She glanced at the driveway, then down at the report in her hand. "Your contractor confirms the job was finished 2 days ago. You've got video, HOA documentation, and eyewitness support." "Not a bad start." "Didn't feel like a start when I got home to this mess." Delaney nodded, stepped off the porch, and crouched near the edge of the torn-up concrete. "They used a jackhammer, no protective barriers. No permits pulled through the city." I followed her gaze to where the ground had been left uneven, cracked, and littered with stray bits of rebar. "They didn't even notify 811, I said. "They could have hit a gas line." Her jaw tightened. "You're aware that what happened here goes beyond HOA enforcement. If they authorize this without your permission, that's criminal mischief. Possibly felony vandalism, depending on the cost of the damage. Contractor's estimate is just under 20 grand. And that's just to get it back the way it was." She let out a sharp breath through her nose. "I'll be making some calls." As she radioed it in, I noticed a few more neighbors gathering on their porches. word had spread fast. Marcus was already fielding questions, pointing at the mess and gesturing toward Tamara's house. Nobody looked surprised, just angry, resigned. One woman from 2 doors down muttered something about her garden beds being tampered with last month after she refused to vote for a dues increase. Delaney wrapped up her call and turned back to me. "I'll need the full video, the signed form, and a list of HOA board members. If you've got any communication from them acknowledging the approval, that'll help speed this along." "I've got it all on a flash drive." Including her handing me the signed approval on camera. "Perfect," she said. "I'll be stopping by her place next." By the time she left, a quiet tension had settled over the neighborhood. People weren't just curious anymore, they were watching, waiting, hoping someone would finally hold Tamara accountable. The next morning, I called in a favor from someone I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. My cousin, Riley, had worked for the district attorney's office before switching to private practice. She specialized in property disputes, and if anyone could navigate the legal maze Tamara had built around herself, it was her. "You've got them in a corner," Riley said after I laid out the situation. "Unauthorized destruction of private property, violation of city ordinance. And if your HOA's bylaws don't grant the board unilateral authority to reverse approvals, then Tamara just acted outside her legal scope." "She'll claim it was an emergency correction," I said. "She can try," Riley replied. "But with your documents and the video, that won't hold. Especially if this wasn't the first time she's pulled something like this." It wasn't. Then we go for triple damages under civil code. "You'll get your driveway plus restitution." A week later, Tamara was served outside the community clubhouse during one of her so-called beautification meetings. She tried to play it off, laughing nervously in front of her followers, but the envelope was heavy with evidence and intent. The legal kind. By then, Officer Delaney had already confirmed that no permits were filed for the demolition. The crew she hired had been paid under the table and had no licensing to do structural removal. One of the workers even confessed to thinking it was an abandoned property. That's when the city got involved. Code enforcement slapped the HOA with 4 citations, each carrying hefty fines. The city attorney opened a formal investigation into the HOA's finances, especially after it came to light that Tamara had dipped into the reserve fund to pay the demolition crew. Without a vote, without documentation, without even informing the treasurer, the HOA board scrambled. 2 members resigned. One claimed she hadn't even known the driveway was being touched. A third said Tamara pushed through the decision during an emergency session that no one else attended. The treasurer tried to distance himself, but his name was on a reimbursement check labeled landscape correction. The community was furious, not just because of what happened to me, but because they all realized how easily it could have been them. Suddenly, old stories started resurfacing. A shed removed without consent, a mailbox replaced and billed without warning, garden beds ripped out and standardized, all under the guise of protecting property values. We held a special meeting that Friday evening on the basketball court behind the clubhouse. Marcus brought a portable PA system. People brought folding chairs. Tamara didn't show. I stood up with the police report in one hand and a petition in the other. "Tamara Alcott acted beyond her authority," I said. "She used HOA funds without approval. She broke the law. And she did it to settle a personal grudge. If we don't act now, this won't be the last time it happens." The petition to remove her gathered 63 signatures by sundown. We only needed 30. The next day, the board met in emergency session, a real one this time, and voted unanimously to suspend Tamara pending legal outcomes. Her access to HOA funds was revoked. Her keys to the clubhouse were collected. Her nameplate was removed from the entrance sign. As for me, Riley filed the civil suit within the week. Between the cost of repairs, legal fees, and punitive damages, the HOA's insurance ended up settling for nearly $60,000. I rebuilt the driveway better than before, and used the extra to install a security system with 8 cameras and motion sensors. The best part: the settlement required the HOA to issue a formal apology, printed and distributed in our monthly newsletter. Right on the front page, beneath a photo of my pristine, newly paved driveway. Tamara hasn't been seen on our street since. 3 weeks after Tamara vanished from the neighborhood radar, a city inspector named Mr. Havorson showed up on my doorstep. He had a clipboard in one hand, a manila folder in the other, and a look like he hadn't smiled since the Reagan administration. "I'm following up on the financial audit of your HOA," he said without so much as a greeting. "Your name came up in the report." I stepped aside and motioned him into the foyer. He didn't take off his boots or comment on the welcome mat. Just opened the folder and started talking like we were already in the middle of a deposition. "Your driveway incident kicked off a sequence of discoveries," he said. "Turns out the HOA's reserve fund isn't just short, it's practically non-existent. The city's trying to account for the funds, but several disbursements were made without a paper trail." "Let me guess," I said, shutting the door behind him. "All under Tamara's reign." "Not all," he replied, "but most. And based on what we're seeing, there may have been state and federal violations." He laid out a spreadsheet with highlighted entries. Most of the numbers meant nothing to me, but one line stood out: an expense labeled property enhancement that matched the exact date my driveway was destroyed. "That's the payment to the crew," I said. Havorson nodded. "Except it wasn't logged until 4 days after the fact, and the check was issued under a different budget code: stormwater management." "Stormwater?" I blinked. "There hasn't been a flood on this street in 20 years. That's what made it stand out. We've also got another entry, $5,800 coded as legal consultation, but no invoice, no law firm name, just a handwritten receipt signed by Tamara." He didn't need to elaborate. I knew what that meant. She'd been using the HOA's money like a personal piggy bank, and now the city had the lid off. By the following Tuesday, a subpoena arrived, not for me, Tamara, and not just from the city, but from the district attorney's office. They were investigating her for misappropriation of funds, falsification of records, and unlawful demolition of private property. The last one tied directly to my case, but the rest had roots stretching back almost 6 years. I didn't realize how deep it all went until I got a call from a resident named Mrs. Garvey. She lived 3 blocks over and hadn't spoken at any of the meetings. Her voice trembled when she introduced herself. "I never thought anyone would stand up to her," she said. 3 years ago, she had my husband's shed condemned while he was in the hospital. Said it was a safety risk. We didn't have the strength to fight her. I invited her over. She brought a folder of photographs, letters, and receipts, everything meticulously kept. Her husband had been a Korean War vet who built the shed himself back in the 70s. Tamara had it removed while he was recovering from surgery, citing a lack of structural integrity. No inspection had ever occurred. No vote had been held. She threatened to fine us $200 a day if we replaced it, Mrs. Garvey whispered. "I still have the notice." I took the documents and added them to the growing pile. Marcus had already started compiling stories like hers into a running log, each one a different version of the same abuse. Unapproved removals, random fines, aesthetic infractions that always seemed to apply to people who had disagreed with Tamara in some way. The DA's office launched a grand jury inquiry within a week. I got a formal request to testify. Riley prepared me like I was walking into federal court. She was all business, no coffee breaks, no small talk. Just a binder full of exhibits and a laser pointer she used like a weapon. "You'll be the first witness," she said. "Your case is the most recent and the most documented. They'll want you to establish a pattern." The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not just temperature-wise, but in tone. Everything echoed, even my footsteps sounded suspicious. The assistant DA, a woman named Marissa Nguyen, met me outside the chamber. "You're not just helping us stop her," she said as she adjusted her notes. You're helping us prevent someone like her from doing this again." Inside, the jurors sat in a semi-circle, not quite glaring but not smiling either. I took the oath, sat in the chair, and started from the top. Not just the driveway, but everything that happened after. The forged expense lines. The misused codes. The construction crew with no permits. The threats. The cover-up. The silence from the rest of the board. Every word was backed up with video, documents, and sworn statements. I wasn't nervous until they played the footage of Tamara handing back the approval form. That's when I saw the jurors lean forward. That's when I knew they weren't just listening, they were absorbing. After I finished, Nguyen handed out copies of the HOA meeting minutes from that week. The ones where no discussion of the driveway took place at all. "Let the record show," she said, "that the HOA president signed an approval, then retroactively claimed it was invalid, despite no formal vote or discussion. Let the record also show that the decision to destroy Mr. Adams' property was executed without legal notice, without city permits, and paid for with misclassified funds." The jurors said nothing, just nodded. 2 weeks later, indictments were handed down. Tamara was arrested at a private tennis club 40 miles away. She tried to claim she was on sabbatical, but the officers weren't buying it. They cuffed her in front of a dozen witnesses. The mugshot made the evening news, but it wasn't just her. The treasurer who signed off on the reimbursement check, indicted, the contractor who took cash without a license, fined and barred from public work, and the HOA board. Dissolved under emergency city order pending re-election. That's when the neighbors really stepped up. Marcus ran for interim president and won in a landslide. Mrs. Garvey, who'd never even attended a meeting before, became secretary. A retired accountant 2 doors down volunteered to audit every expense dating back 10 years. We held the first open forum under the new board on a Saturday morning. More than 70 residents showed up. Coffee, donuts, folding chairs. It felt like a town hall instead of a war zone. "We're not here to punish," Marcus said, "but we are here to fix what was broken, and that starts with transparency." He handed out printed copies of the new bylaw amendments. No funds could be moved without 2 signatures. All decisions required a public vote. No penalties without photographic evidence and third-party review. I didn't say much. Just sat in the back, watching it all unfold. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was finally ours again. And then came the restitution. The settlement Riley filed reached court just before Tamara's arraignment. The judge ruled in our favor. Triple damages. HOA insurance picked up the tab, but the company filed a claim against Tamara personally to recoup. They seized her car, froze her accounts. Put a lien on her second property in Sarasota. I got the check in early spring. I used part of it to repave the driveway again, but this time I added custom pavers. Slate gray with deep black borders, not just functional, beautiful. The rest went to a community emergency fund. We named it the Garvey Fund. Funny how a driveway can become the first domino. Funny how power, when abused long enough, can unravel in a single moment of arrogance. Tamara thought she could tear up concrete and leave no cracks behind. She was wrong. By mid-spring, the neighborhood had transformed in ways that went beyond fresh pavement and removed nameplates. The fear was gone. You could feel it in the way people waved longer, lingered in their yards, and started replacing the plain hedges Tamara used to mandate with flowers of every shade. Even the sidewalks seemed less rigid, as if the place itself had exhaled for the first time in years. But not everything was blooming. 2 weeks after Tamara's arraignment, the city's forensic accountant released a supplemental report. Riley got a copy before it went public. She read it in my kitchen, flipping through the pages with the mechanical calm of someone used to finding rot behind polished walls. She didn't just misuse the HOA funds, Riley said, tapping a line near the bottom. She laundered them. I leaned over the counter. Through what? A shell landscaping business. Registered in the name of her cousin in Arizona. She'd submit inflated invoices for non-existent projects retaining walls, erosion control, things nobody would ever verify, and cut herself checks through the HOA. How long was that going on? Looks like about 5 years. The total's just under $200,000. I sat back. That's not just mismanagement, that's fraud at scale. Which is why the state's stepping in now. She closed the folder and exhaled through her nose. The DA's adding wire fraud and racketeering to the charges. There's talk of involving the FBI since some of the funds crossed state lines. The next day, a pair of unmarked SUVs parked outside what used to be Tamara's house. The blinds were drawn, the mailbox stuffed. Agents in plain clothes entered with a warrant and came out with 2 desktop towers, a stack of external drives, and a locked cash box. The whole street watched from behind cracked windows and porch swings. No one cheered. No one gloated. They just absorbed it quietly, like the final act of a play they never auditioned for but had lived in, line by line. Later that week, Marcus called an emergency meeting not out of panic but transparency. He stood in front of a folding table with a stack of printed ledgers and a projector aimed at the side of the clubhouse. "We've uncovered evidence that Tamara created a separate set of books," he said. "One that listed fake vendors and inflated contracts. The board never saw these." The treasurer says he was given summaries, not originals. A man from the second cul-de-sac, Jorge, I think, raised his hand. "Are we liable for any of this?" "No," Marcus said. "The city confirmed we're considered victims." They're treating the HOA as an entity that was defrauded, not complicit. Another hand went up. "What about the dues increase last winter? The one she said was for emergency reserve recovery." "That's under review," Marcus replied. "If the funds were misdirected, we'll get restitution." The city's coordinating with an independent auditor now. I didn't speak during that meeting. I just watched the room. People who'd once whispered their grievances were now asking precise questions. No more side glances, no more nodding and staying quiet. The silence had been broken, and no one wanted it back. 3 days later, a federal indictment was filed. The HOA embezzlement crossed enough jurisdictions to trigger interstate wire fraud charges. The landscaping company was a front. Her cousin, already cooperating in exchange for immunity. He'd never seen a dime. Just let her use his name and address to register the LLC. Tamara was denied bail. That week, a local news van rolled through the neighborhood. The anchor, a polished brunette with perfect posture, knocked on my door asking for a statement. I declined. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I'd already said it when I'd testified, when I'd stood in front of the grand jury, when I handed over the flash drive that started it all. The story was out there now. It didn't need another quote. Instead, I put my time into something else. The community voted to use a portion of the settlement funds to create a formal oversight committee, 5 residents, rotated annually, with direct access to all financial records. No more closed-door meetings. No more unilateral decisions. Every expense over $500 required a published notice and a majority vote. I was asked to chair it. At first, I hesitated. I'd never wanted to be involved in politics, even the neighborhood kind. But then I thought of Mrs. Garvey's photographs. Of Marcus pacing outside his garage the day Tamara had his permit denied for architectural disharmony. Of the way people looked at their own homes like they were renting them from a tyrant with a clipboard. I accepted. Our first act was to commission a full forensic rebuild of the HOA's finances, with quarterly reports posted publicly. The second was to revise the bylaws so no president could override a vote without written consent from 2/3 of the board. The third. We installed a permanent community bulletin board outside the clubhouse with a simple brass plaque at the top, governed by the people who live here. That fall, I found myself invited to give a short talk at a regional HOA reform summit. Apparently, word had spread about the case, and other communities were looking for guidance. I stood behind a podium in a modest conference hall, talking to retirees, veterans, young couples, and single parents, all of them tired of the same story playing out in different zip codes. This started with a driveway, I said, but it ended with accountability. Not because of one person, but because a community decided it was done being quiet. They asked questions. They took notes. Some of them looked at me like I'd cracked some code, but I reminded them it wasn't magic. It was documentation, persistence, and refusing to let intimidation win. By the time winter crept in, the final sentencing came down. Tamara was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, with no parole for at least 8. She was ordered to repay the full amount embezzled, though we all knew only a fraction would ever be recovered. Still, the message was clear: abuse power here and you'll lose it publicly, legally, permanently. The HOA, once a symbol of control, became a model of reform. Other neighborhoods reached out, asking to copy our new bylaws. Some even asked Marcus to speak at their meetings. He always said no, said he preferred this neighborhood just the way it was. One evening, I pulled into the driveway just as the sun dipped low, casting gold across those slate and black pavers. A kid from down the block waved as he rode past on his bike. Wind chimes tinkled from the porch next door. No one was being cited. No one was being fined for paint colors or mailbox fonts. Just homes, just people, just peace. The way a neighborhood's supposed to be.